Don't leave the TV on and either turn off the lights in the living room or your room. Got it, got it. I'll make sure to save electricity. I left the house to go shopping far away. Whether leaving or staying at home, we as a family are committed to saving energy, like remembering to turn off lights and setting the air conditioner to the right temperature. Today, like always, we reminded each other in the family and I went out. However, a few hours later when I returned, our dear home had completely changed. Since you love saving so much, I'll save electricity for you. The sound that echoed maliciously was Amelia's laughter. Amelia, who sneaked in secretly, had turned off our home's breaker, causing a major problem. The reason she did this? My name is Emma. At 29, I married Liam, my same-aged partner, and moved into my in-laws' house. My mother-in-law had already passed away, and my father-in-law James, who has a respiratory illness, was living alone. Persuaded by my concerned husband, I started living there while continuing my job. In the in-laws' house, there was also the unmarried Amelia, but we never really got along. James is calm and kind, much like my husband. In contrast, his sister Amelia is temperamental and volatile. Being straightforward, I often clashed with her, and being a few years older, I was somehow managing to keep her in check. Excluding her, it was a peaceful life. But within half a year, James's illness worsened. He needed an oxygen machine even to stay at home. Both Amelia and I were working, so there was no one to help James during the day. We should have arranged for him to live in a care facility, but James refused to leave the house filled with memories of his wife. Consulting with my husband, we concluded it would be cruel to force James to move. So we hired a caregiver, but that led to more problems. Already not getting along with me, Amelia disliked strangers entering her home and started harassing the caregiver. Invisibly to us, she was abusive and sarcastic, obstructing the work and repeatedly complained to the agency, saying they couldn't be trusted with her father. By the time we realized the cause, multiple caregivers had quit, and the agency told us they couldn't send anyone new. What do we do now? Other agencies have refused us too. We must be blacklisted, damn it, all because of Amelia. Known as a troublesome household, we could no longer hope for a caregiver. We had to think of a solution with a sigh. Amelia, always self-centered, had isolated herself from the family. My husband, as her brother, tried to correct her, but it only led to fierce arguments, and he eventually told her to move out and live independently. But Amelia, angered by such reprimands, started complaining to me, as I was less intimidating than her brother. You're a daughter-in-law now, so you should take care of him, Emma. Liam can't quit his job being a man, but you're different. Overheard by my husband, this sparked another argument. This situation didn't allow James to rest and recover peacefully. I didn't want to give in to Amelia's demands, but I couldn't just stand by either. Feeling indebted to James, who had tried to make me feel at home despite his illness, I decided. I'll quit my job and take care of James. I'll start learning about caregiving bit by bit. After all, James is family to me too. When I finally decided to resign for caregiving, James and my husband thanked me with tears. It was a real challenge learning about caregiving from scratch, but James always kindly encouraged me, despite my struggles. The only thing that didn't change was Amelia. She neither moved out nor helped with the housework or caregiving. On her days off, she would disappear, presumably to hang out. Even though I had more time, I was busy with James and studying for caregiving. My husband and I shared household chores, but whenever something was missed, Amelia was quick to complain. Oh, Emma decided to take on both caregiving and housework, right? You like doing everything yourself, don't you? If I even slightly talked back, she would retaliate unpleasantly. She kept harassing me like this, but was always found out and scolded by my husband and others. Every time she would play the victim, saying, James is too kind to say anything, so I'm doing it for him. Naturally, things didn't improve, and her constant interference slowed down my household tasks, quickly piling up stress. I'm truly grateful to the caregivers who managed to smile and care for James despite her meddling. Not just me, but James and the others were fed up with Amelia's persistent attitude. However, one day, while my husband and I were secretly discussing how to encourage her independence, she announced, I got engaged and I'm moving out. Goodbye, Dad. I'll come back to visit sometimes. With that, Amelia left the house obediently. We were surprised, but with her stormy presence gone, the house's atmosphere stabilized. James was aging, and his condition was a concern, so there were talks of moving him to a care facility, but as I got accustomed to caregiving, we decided to continue with home care. Amelia, now living at her fiancé's place, often returned home. "I bet there will be leftovers from dinner tonight. Put them in a Tupperware. I'll take them with me." Apparently, she was relying on our leftovers to avoid cooking for her fiancé. Her selfishness remained, treating me like a housemaid as before. "Amelia, don't order Emma around without helping yourself." Yeah, sorry, Emma. That's enough, right? Hurry up with the dinner." Even when scolded by James, she would dismiss it with an indifferent attitude. Honestly, the amount of food I had to prepare didn't change much from before she left, so that wasn't really an issue. Rather, the problem was the food and utility costs. Although Amelia had moved out and stopped contributing financially, her frequent returns and unrestrained behavior strained our budget. Moreover, she had no sense of saving electricity or money. "Amelia, turn off the lights in unused rooms. Can I go ahead if you're not using the shower?" Amelia, lying on the couch with her back to the still-on TV, seemed to be playing games on her mobile phone. She had left the lights on in the bathroom and changing room, indicating she'd take a shower, but showed no signs of moving. The unnecessary electricity use and her lingering were holding everyone back. When I asked her to decide between gaming or showering, Amelia glared at me angrily. "Don't tell me what to do. I was just about to go. You always nag about saving and cutting costs, but it hardly makes a difference. You're so petty, Auntie." "What did you just call me?" "I called you Emma. Don't pretend you hear wrong and get mad," she retorted, even as James scolded her. While saying this, Amelia finally turned off the TV and headed to the changing room. She always complained, but at least she listened to what was said. However, having worked for years and having a fiancé, her mindset remained that of a rebellious child. I had stopped expecting her to act her age. Though I didn't mind it, our relationship with Amelia didn't improve even after she left home, remaining tense. I had hoped that saving money could be a common ground for our family, but that too seemed unlikely. One day, I was driving to a large shopping mall in the suburbs, away from home. I was running an errand for James. James wasn't able to go out, but he needed to carry a portable oxygen tank when he did. For the elderly James, carrying the heavy tank, even with a carrier, was burdensome, and the visible tubes made it obvious he was on oxygen therapy. Tired of being pitied by acquaintances saying, "Poor thing," each time I saw him, James preferred staying home. There were often errands, but my husband usually handled them when he was home, being careful not to leave James alone. This time I had no choice but to leave him for the errand. I was worried, but James wasn't helpless. He only needed the tank for breathing. He was still capable of doing quite a bit by himself. While it's important to be mindful of saving electricity, I asked him to use the air conditioning as needed, and I set off for shopping. I completed the shopping without issues and returned home with the groceries a few hours later. I had left in the early morning, but now it was evening. Before entering the house, I picked up my mobile phone. There might be a message from my husband about dinner. However, what I saw on the screen shocked me. Huh? There were numerous missed calls. From my husband, James, and the general hospital where James goes. A cold sweat broke out on my back. While driving, I'd switched my phone to a mode that wouldn't ring. And in my rush to get home early today, I forgot to switch it back, unaware of the incoming calls. A sense of foreboding crossed my mind. First, I tried calling back my husband, but the phone just kept ringing without connecting. Growing more anxious, I then tried James's number, but there was no answer. As a last hope, I called the hospital. A receptionist answered, and trying to stay composed, I asked about James. "James is currently hospitalized. I can't provide more details over the phone. Could you please come to the hospital?" After being transferred to several departments, I was informed of this and froze. I quickly replied, "I'm on my way," and hurriedly turned the car key, restarting the engine. The car was filled with urgency. As if reflecting my anxiety, the roads were congested. James had been fine when I left, waving goodbye as usual. I regretted leaving him alone, wondering how he could have been hospitalized so suddenly. Arriving at the hospital, I headed to the directed room. Walking down the tense corridor, I quietly opened the door, and there sat my husband, who had been unreachable. We looked at each other in surprise, but he explained that he was at the hospital waiting for James's tests, which is why he couldn't answer the phone. I couldn't answer the phone either, I'm sorry. "That's okay, so how is James doing?" He prompted me to look at James, who was sleeping in the bed. His complexion seemed a bit off, but his breathing, which I had been worried about, appeared calm. He's okay. There's no problem with his condition. He's just here for some tests, actually. Hearing from my husband that James was not in danger, I finally relaxed. But why was James hospitalized? Just as I was about to ask that question, the door to the room burst open. It was Amelia rushing in, her eyes filled with fear. She ignored us and ran straight to James's bed. Seeing him lying there, she let out a scream. "What happened, Dad?" Her voice was so loud that my husband hurried to calm her down, but her frantic voice echoed through the room. "Please calm down." My husband tried to pull her away from the bed. Her frightened voice eventually quieted down, but then she suddenly glared at me and started yelling with intense emotion. "What were you doing while you were with him?" I was overwhelmed by her anger and lost for words. My husband intervened to calm her, but her anger was still directed at me. Confused, I was caught in a strange sensation. James needed oxygen, but such a sudden hospitalization seemed unlikely. "Wait, can we talk calmly?" My husband turned to us with a calm voice, explaining what he knew. James was transported here because the power to his oxygen device had been turned off. After I left, James had been sleeping in his room, but during that time, the power went off. Awoken by breathlessness and trying to turn the device back on, it wouldn't work, and he couldn't reach me or my husband. James connected a portable tank and managed to calm down, but he was anxious about waiting for us to return. Feeling a headache, James decided to go to the hospital, but we usually drive him, so he had no way to get there. He tried calling a taxi, but his hands were trembling, making it difficult to dial. So James went to ask neighbors to call a taxi for him. The neighbor who came out to the entrance screamed upon seeing James. He was taken to the living room, laid down and cooled with ice packs while waiting for the ambulance. That's when James realized he had gotten heat stroke. After that, thanks to the appropriate treatment at the hospital, James's condition stabilized and he was safe. My husband heard from the doctor that James might not have noticed the heat due to his age, and he thought the trembling hands and headache were just symptoms of aging. Because James had convulsions, he was immediately treated and hospitalized for testing, leading to the current situation. After hearing this explanation from my husband, I asked him a daring question. "It's unlikely that the power source for the device wouldn't work. Didn't we install it in a place where the plug couldn't be accidentally pulled out?" My husband furrowed his brow and seemed deep in thought. Amelia remained silent during this time, but her face was visibly pale. "That's right. It's impossible for it to come unplugged on its own. I went back home to check, and the plug wasn't out." "Then how?" I was even more confused by my husband's words. He had returned home to prepare for the hospital stay, and found that although the power was off, the plug was still connected. He then looked sternly at Amelia. It was clear she was hiding something, but I couldn't understand why he was so angry. Suddenly, my husband shouted at Amelia. "You cut off the breaker, didn't you? Say something." Amelia jolted, beginning to tremble. She tried to say something, but only inaudible sounds came out. Then my husband pulled something out of his pocket. The hospital had tried to contact me, my husband, and Amelia several times, but my husband was the first to get through. When he returned home for the preparations, he immediately sensed something odd. As soon as he opened the door, a wave of incredible heat hit him. The lights in the entrance hall didn't work. Realizing this, he checked around the house and found all the electrical appliances were off. He rushed to check the breaker, and as expected, the switch was turned off. Surprised and suspicious, he wondered why this happened. There was no event like a lightning strike to cause the breaker to trip, and no other houses seemed to be affected by a power outage. However, he then remembered something. Our house had several security cameras installed. Before we got married, a burglar had broken into the house, and James had installed them for my mother-in-law's peace of mind. Even though we were saving money, those were kept for everyone's safety, and we weren't allowed to remove them. Footage up to the power outage should still be there, my husband thought, so he quickly restored the power and checked the recordings. "I have the footage here. I transferred it to show both of you." In the hospital room, my husband took out his mobile phone. He showed us the transferred footage. The first thing shown was a familiar view of our house's entrance. A few minutes after I left, Amelia appeared. I was surprised to learn that she had come to the house and involuntarily glanced at her. She entered the house using her key. Unlike her usual noise, she looked around suspiciously, almost as if she was checking if I was away. My husband then switched the footage from a camera inside the entrance. The breaker in our house is located near the ceiling above the shoe rack. Amelia climbed onto a chair meant for wearing shoes and opened the breaker's cover. "What are you doing?" Even though I knew what was coming, I couldn't suppress my scream. The camera had sound recognition, so along with the movement noises, her dreadful whispering was recorded.
"This is the breaker, right? If the fridge stops, Emma will calm down a bit."
Her malicious laughter echoed in the silent hospital room. "I'll save electricity for you, your favorite." After that, the footage ended due to her turning off the breaker. We were all speechless and motionless. If the breaker was off, of course the whole house's power supply would stop. The contents of the fridge must have spoiled in the hours before my husband noticed. Her frantic behavior when she rushed into the hospital room suggested she hadn't realized her actions could endanger James's life, a very malicious way to punish me. However, her reaction was unbelievable.
"It's because you're always nagging about saving electricity."
Without any signs of remorse, and with tears in her eyes, Amelia started justifying herself.
"I didn't know James was home. I thought he had gone out with you. It's your fault for leaving him behind."
She kept repeating,
"I had no idea this would happen."
Contrasting her tearful self-defense, I was filled with anger. Breaking in like a thief and turning off the breaker,
It's a miracle he survived. What if something had happened to Dad?
I couldn't help but blame Amelia, but she shouted back at me in defense.
"Then it's your fault. It's because that James is in this situation."
Her accusations pierced my heart. Indeed, I shouldn't have left James alone. Was it my mistake to leave him, thinking going far would be a burden? The tension in the hospital room was palpable, then suddenly broken. "Be quiet." James, who was supposed to be sleeping, scolded her sternly. He couldn't raise his voice much due to his illness. Being inherently calm, his outburst surprised us all. All three of us turned to him in unison. "Do you realize what you have done? You've caused trouble for everyone and nearly killed me. Emma is not to blame." James's eyes were filled with anger and disappointment. His tone was stern, unlike his usual gentle demeanor. Awakened by Amelia's screaming and commotion, he had heard everything, including the surveillance camera discussion. "If you're going to continue making noise, leave, and don't come back to the house ever again." Scolded harshly, Amelia turned pale and froze, but soon began to cry loudly. Which was very disturbing. She apologized to James, but he insisted she leave, and my husband escorted her out of the room. James was discharged just a few days later. When we went to the hospital to pick him up, he greeted us with a smile, seemingly recovered. However, upon returning home, Amelia was waiting at the front door. She hadn't shown up in front of us since that incident. We were expecting an apology, but her words were the same as before.
"It's your fault. It's all because of you that James ended up like this."
James and my husband were exasperated. Unwilling to admit fault and still blaming me, James stepped forward. "Be thankful I'm not reporting you to the police because you're family. Your actions are absolutely unforgivable." His cold voice in the hospital room hadn't changed, and she fell silent. But James didn't stop there. He seemed to despise her from the bottom of his heart. "It's disarmament. I can't believe you still don't realize the severity of what you've done. Don't come to our house again. I went to the hospital, but I won't attend your wedding either." He spoke harshly, pushed Amelia aside, and entered the house vigorously. She was probably not expecting to be disowned by her father, and stood there in shock. We decided to stand by James and support him, so we entered the house, leaving her behind. Amelia repeatedly tried to apologize afterwards, but James ignored all her attempts. Having been troubled by her too much, we had no sympathy and upheld his decision. James had been asked to financially support Amelia's wedding and honeymoon, but he refused all requests and declared he wouldn't attend the wedding. One day, Amelia ambushed me outside the house. She desperately apologized and begged me to persuade James, but I had already decided not to forgive her. Knowing she would persist if ignored, I quietly listened to her, before leaving her there and walking away. This series of events eventually became known to Amelia's fiancé. James had refused to attend the wedding for safety reasons, which puzzled her fiancé, prompting him to contact James. Unaware of the full story, her fiancé was shocked to hear about the emergency caused by Amelia and hurriedly apologized to James. The fiancé, unlike Amelia, seemed to have reasonable judgment. Calling her actions attempted murder, the wedding was eventually called off. They hadn't moved into their new home yet, but the fiancé canceled it and kicked Amelia out. Having already quit her job and spent her savings on beauty treatments in preparation for the wedding, she was left nearly broke. With the wedding cancellation's cost to bear, she fell into debt but didn't show up at our doorstep. Meanwhile, the three of us were living peacefully. Without Amelia's disruptive presence, James's health seemed to be improving. Though we couldn't be complacent, due to his age, a care facility seemed unnecessary for now. We were even planning a trip.